He will talk about the role of a major retailer in that value chain. He will talk about chain collaboration, and basically he will give us his views on his beliefs on what seafood has to offer going into the future. Let's give a kind welcome to Giles Bolton.
Thank you. So I think I know less about seafood than the vast majority of people in the room, which is slightly unnerving. To give you a bit of context on that, this is my first time in Norway. So far I've discovered that I really want to live in Bergen. I only want to travel on a beautiful gas-powered ferry to get to work. And actually, I had a great visit yesterday with Leroy, and thank you to Hilton Sea Chill for organizing it too. And I tried some of the fish meal with an algal oil and an insect component. And I'd be quite happy eating that. I feel a little bit faster growth than I did yesterday. It could be the hospitality. I'm not sure. Look, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tesco because I can't tell you very much you don't already know about seafood. I'll tell you about how we see the challenges and where seafood fits into that. So hopefully there's a clicker. Here's something you don't know, first of all, a bit about Tesco. So just last year we had our 100-year anniversary. We have nearly 7,000 stores, 450,000 colleagues. We just heard from the Faroes about being the biggest private sector employer in that country. We're the biggest private sector employer in the UK. We also have stores in a number of other countries. Interesting for me, the role of supermarkets, the positive social role historically was making food, good quality, safe food, accessible and affordable to everybody. We'll come back to that. What does our industry look like now? Here's something that you do know. Much too much of the food industry is unsustainable. You've already heard some of the data around it. What's really interesting is when you look at the future of the planet is how much the food industry as a whole is at absolutely the heart of the crisis. So we're already in the whole food sector the second biggest contributor to climate change. And because of the advances in renewable energy by the mid-2030s, maybe 2040, which arguably is when we will really start to be experiencing the impacts of the climate change that man has been created, we will become the biggest contributor to climate change. Most estimates are that the food industry currently creates about 60% of global biodiversity loss, which is a similar domino impact to climate change that we don't really understand. So if we're going to change, it has to be really significant. And you know the kickers already, which is we're unsustainably using those resources at the moment, but with the growth in population to 2050, on current production models, we have to produce maybe 50 to 70% more food at sort of basic vegetable and grain production. And that's a very, very intimidating challenge. So we have to change. For Tesco, if you see that coming, like the good businesses in the room, you think, how do you get on the front foot? Well, we're no different from many other businesses. We basically go with an idea that to act, what you need to do is have a target and some measures, and then you need action. And what we've really struggled with, like so many people, is to be able to bring together the different impacts of all the different ecosystems which we work across. And how can you put that together in a measure? There isn't a measure for the environmental impact of food, or there wasn't until we worked with WWF, who are our partners on this, to try and establish one. So we first of all set out the ambition, the target, which is to reduce the environmental impact of the average UK shopping basket by 50%. And then the first thing we've done over the last 12 months is to then create some measures to do that. And I'm not going to go into detail about it, but hopefully it conveys a sense of how serious we are about it. We said that publicly. And really interestingly, when we've tried to work out how can you possibly measure something so enormously complex, I mean, it's a trade-off, right, between good science and what's basically measurable. We've tried to take a proxy number of products which we think are really representative of the change we want to make. And so here's an interesting picture, but there's salmon fillets as one of the products we use as a proxy. And I'll talk a little later on about some of the details of how we seek to measure, how have we chosen the right measure. But what I want to say to you is there is a recognition in my company, and it is true of a number of other retailers, that fundamentally this needs to change. You can really think about the change that you need to create in 3 buckets if you want to change the environmental impact of food. There is how much diets need to change, and how do we support customers who want to shift their diets, make it really easy for them. There's how we collectively work to improve demand, improve supply. That is the standard, if you like, quite well-established work of sustainability, whether it's in fisheries, whether it's in forestry or in agriculture. And the third part is how do we, as much as possible, eliminate waste. You may be aware that the world produces probably 30 to 40% more food than actually gets consumed at the moment because of waste. So all those are our levers to change fundamentally the environmental impact of food. So a little bit now to bring this down into what does our plan look like as a retailer, specifically on fisheries. And I've just tried to put down so you get a sense of where we are, what our main targets and measures are. So we want to sustainably source all our wild fish. Latest results, we're nearly 80%. The biggest gap for us for MSC is in tuna, where we have particular catch method requirements. But we really want to be able to get to that point. And for full disclosure, I'm on the board of the MSC, but I'm very much here talking from a Tesco perspective today. We need to have that full level of traceability, and we've made our own wild sources available through the Ocean Disclosure Project. Very obviously, it's the first thing which customers would say to you would be, don't sell me something which is unsustainable. The easiest benchmark for that, the IUCN Red List. We have no tolerance for IUU fishing. You do an incredibly hard job in your industry. We do a hard job trying to figure out how best to sell in a competitive market to people. One of the really hard things for us, though, is if things go wrong, we're the person where the hit comes first of all. So don't underestimate how important this is, how much we are really keen to avoid any of this, both reputationally and because it's not going to lead us to the sustainable seas we want in the future. Fundamentally important is that we focus on the most serious risks to workers. I started off my time in Tesco and working predominantly on human rights. Before that, I had 10 years as an aid worker. And when people in my business say to me, okay, tell us about human rights risks in the business, Giles, I kind of think the simplest answer is, where would you least like to be a worker in our supply chain? And honestly, some of probably the worst overall is being a worker on a boat in a lot of parts of the world and a lot of your industry and our industry. We have a long way to go. I'll come back to that. And interestingly, one of the measures, if I bring it back to that sustainable basket measure, we've tried to bring down how we're measuring the environmental impact of food, which is really going to drive the decisions we take. The key indicator that's really relevant to a lot of people in the room is this one. It's the average forage fish dependency ratio for oil, fish feed, and key salmon suppliers. So we'll come back to that, but the message there is that this is at the heart of our thinking and our planning about how we support our customers to a more sustainable future for their food. Okay, a bit about our approach. We break it into 3 elements, but I'm going to put them on the screen just for speed. What can we do to support and enable and work with you to create that incremental change? So it's about the certification, the engagement with a number of stakeholders, and the FIPS, of course. Then we ask ourselves, and this is the same model we apply across each of the ecosystems we work in, we say, well, what is going to create transformational levels of change, which is what we all know we're going to have as well as the incremental change. So for us, in this, it particularly includes fishing gear, electronic monitoring, VMS, fish meal, again, I said we'll come back to. And then we do recognize, and I think it's something that retailers have maybe in the past a bit slow to recognize, we recognize that we have a role as the voice of customers, really, to make sure we're part of advocacy as well, that we're not just sitting there critically saying, come on guys, up your game, here's what we want, but we have a role in that process as well, in dialogue with governments, in cross-industry bodies and so on. So that's our basic model. And before I get on to the really interesting bit, we're proud of some of the progress we're making. We've come a long way as Tesco in the last few years, probably in the last 5, and we're the Supermarket of the Year in the UK in 2019. We're part of the Global Ghost Initiative. And there are some very nice ways we encourage increasingly work with communities on cleanups and engaging the next generation. So, we want to be we want to be a responsible partner for the seafood sector, because fundamentally, as you will see in a moment, it is vital to the ability for us to support and enable our customers to eat sustainably and healthily in the future. So here's how we think of the opportunity. Oh, we're jumping. Okay. In the UK, we don't eat as much fish as we should at the moment. The advice we have from a health perspective is that customers should eat about 200 grams a week, one oily. We're under consuming, not quite, less than 50%. But when you see most of the targets for how you get to a really balanced dietary plate, from a sustainability perspective, the real growth is in fish. And I'm like lots of other people you've heard from in this room. When I look at the challenge for the world, I can't look at much of the meat industry in the moment and say the growth can come from there. I can look at parts of the fruit and vegetable and grains industry and say, and nuts, that we can grow those. But for protein, the opportunity is enormous. And you've heard it from people who have scientific expertise, and I don't, but we share the same view. The opportunity, particularly for aquaculture, is huge. The question I'm really asking is, are we on track? And the solution, as we sit at the moment, is we're not. And that's not to say there aren't fantastic efforts going on. But if the scale of the need, when you look at those statistics about how the world is changing, from our point of view, our ability to be able to get sustainable, affordable, healthy proteins to our customer is going to need a significant increase in production. And we don't think there is anything like the level of innovation and progress yet that we are going to need to get there. So if the message you're taking from me, I hope, is anything, it is that we really want you, but together we've got to crack through some of these challenges and we've got to get speedier at it. Okay, I'm going to talk about a few examples, right? Most of it's going to be a bit about aquaculture. Mackerel, many of you in the room will know an awful lot about, again, more than me. But the very basics of what we need to be able to do before we get to the complexity of aquaculture on wild fish is to manage our stocks and get the governance right. For the UK, our top species by volume, mackerel is really important. For Tesco, 12% of our MSC certified volumes will be affected this year because of the loss of certification. Now, at the moment, that's because of the governance. But the whole point of the governance is that will undermine the stock levels very likely if we don't get it right. What can I say that you don't already know? Not very much. Really affects our goal, but really, for those of you who are involved, I know it's hard. I'd be worried about the impact on perceptions of mackerel for the long term. So this might be a hiccup for some of you, and hopefully you get back on track. But I can tell you as a UK customer that the perceptions of North Sea cod really fundamental. And once people think you're an unsustainable stock, it really affects that perception and demand. So what's going on with mackerel now really needs everybody to come together and fix this issue. And if you think there's any useful roles we can do in playing a role other than trying to share our own concern about it, please let us know. Just so you get a sense of what we think our action can partly be. Don't worry too much about the name, but we're trying to bring together UK retail. I don't think retail is often very good about bringing its voice together from different parties to try and create some common understanding. We need to learn more about what the issues are, and we want to bring our advocacy to it. So we're working to do that. And if other people want to join that initially UK growing group, we'd be absolutely delighted. Okay, I said that that was relatively simple on wild fish because aquaculture fundamentally at the moment means it's about wild fish because the components of feed and then all the other environmental challenges that you face. So if aquaculture is the really, really big opportunity, what do we think about it? Customers expect 100% sustainability. I think we are vulnerable in this industry. We have a very big public debate about the sustainability of our wild fish sources. And yet we're, as an industry, producing lots of farm fish, which doesn't really operate too often to the same standards. That will not be reputationally something that can contain for too long. Okay, and I think there is some brilliant progress in the room about trying to address that problem. But I do think there is a problem coming if we can't go faster. Thank you to the innovators and the pioneers. I've met some of them in the conference. When I try and talk about the change in diets in Tesco and with UK stakeholders, something like algal oil is a brilliant example of a step change innovation that could really drive change, because it's a new source. It's a genuinely potentially sustainable source. And it's been fantastic to see a number of our producers start to experiment with that. The question is, can we go harder? Can we go faster? How do we really scale this up? What we see in different sectors of food production way outside seafood is the hardest part of this is you can prove an innovation works, you can prove on paper that the economics ought to work, but to make that jump to really competitive, scalable to other sources is a big challenge, and it takes some bravery and it takes some bets. But you nearly always find that the businesses at the forefront of doing that are the ones who are strongest in the long term, because they're understanding the new opportunity first, they're figuring out how to make it work. And I don't see that seafood should be any different, though I have no expertise myself. Insect protein, a natural part of many fish's diet. You know, again, can we go harder and faster on that? It's very difficult to make that scalability, but when you look at insect protein as a component of feed, actually we see that it's got much more potential to grow more quickly in the aquaculture sector than we do at the moment in the meat sector. It's proving a bit more difficult to make that technology really work and get the right dietary component into, so for example, chicken feed. I think this is a huge opportunity for the seafood sector. But what else is there, and how do we move quicker together? Other areas where we see that innovation is needed, catch methods. I love this picture. I'm going to try and explain what it is. I cannot tell you personally as a scientist that it's brilliant, but this is a picture from an experiment that's happening in New Zealand. It's happened with some New Zealand state sponsorship, and it's a new way of filtering the catch in that gives a much better chance of having the juveniles and smaller fish exit on the process. Also involves the fish coming onto the boat without being electrically stunned, which is better for animal welfare. Two really big companies in New Zealand getting very good results from this. Who else can try it? I can't tell you if it works. It looks fantastic from the initial data that they're collecting. Are we really trying this and thinking, how do we get to this? It's really hard as a big industry based on a very competitive market to make those experiments, to not be conservative about how to do it. But these kind of jumps can be a big part of the progress. And then I have to tell you, part of my job and the thing that our customers care most about at the moment in the UK is packaging. The reason being that packaging and plastic is, I think, a great distillation of what is wrong with our consumption of resources on the planet, and it's very personal for people. We can't go on doing single-use polystyrene boxes. I mean, easy for me to say, right? Difficult for people to figure out. But, I mean, it's obvious. It doesn't add up on any number of measures, from the amount of space it uses to, particularly the vulnerability of that to get broken up into pieces and end up in the natural environment and water sources. It's crazy. So either reuse models, I think reuse models are a really exciting proposition, or look at cardboard. We're doing an increasing amount of cardboard. There's some very interesting results initially we see with partners in the UK, including around fish storage. But again, I think this is coming at our industry. I'm surprised that it is not there already. Okay, and a last one for me, quite deliberately put last because it underpins everything else, and it probably underlines the complexity of the challenge, but hey, this is where we are. I said I'd talk a bit more about human rights. I think human rights in the fishing industry, and I absolutely don't mean many of the great businesses in this room, but for the whole fishing sector has been a dirty secret for too long. It's really unacceptable. Far too many places, the conditions. So what are the things we think really matter? And I've been involved in leading some work on in the Consumer Goods Forum to try and help get a better grip of some of these issues and try and create consistency from that retail and brand world in our asks of you. So human rights due diligence, that's really where I was saying, understand where your risk is biggest so you can focus your effort there. It's definitely not rocket science. A focus on responsible recruitment. So we absolutely think that the best thing you can do to try and avoid a vulnerability to exploitation is making sure that the people who work in your supply chain did not have to pay to get their job, because it makes them highly vulnerable to exploitation. So we need to move to responsible recruitment models, good working conditions in line with the ILO code C188, grievance mechanisms of remediation. It's a hard sector. It's incredibly important. There isn't a kind of absolutely standard model which works in every situation, but you should all be looking at it if you're not already. And then that point about advocacy, so not just for us, but where there are governments that are not signed up to that, how do we work together and bring that voice so we can improve those standards? So listen, that is a quick tour. And I want to end with a massive thank you. As someone who's not experienced in this sector, I was incredibly impressed by some of the things that I've seen in the short time I've been here. And to hear the level of consensus and the other speakers around some of the issues I've just touched on is really exciting. I mean, it's quite intimidating as a speaker when you find yourself repeating some of the things that other people have said. But as an industry ready to work together to create change, and really as part of the overall global seafood industry that's right at the forefront of it, it's a very exciting time with a massive amount of opportunity. We know we have a role in being a partner to that progress. So thank you very much.